I'd like to introduce Alex Marienthal. He is the lead forecaster in the Gallatin National Forest up in Montana. And he is going to be presenting today on a whole suite of incidents that occurred during low danger. So I think this is a great talk, poignant for us, given our long runs in low danger as well. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'll get my PowerPoint pulled up here. So yeah, this talk came together to emphasize, what everyone who reads the forecast has probably heard us say anytime there's low danger, is that low danger does not equal no danger. And last season up here highlighted that for us. Sorry. There we go.
Alex, you're cutting out a bit. Maybe we can check the connection. Well, it looks like we lost Alex there. We're going to try to get him back. So maybe take a quick break and give us 5. Thanks.
Oh. Hey, I guess I'm back on here.
Perfect. I just gave people 5, so maybe we'll hang out for a couple minutes.
Okay.
Thanks.
See. Yeah, let me know if you want me to screen share again or.
Yeah, we'll plug it back in here in 3 minutes.
Okay.
Thanks for logging back in there. All right, Alex, I think if you're ready to roll, let's do it.
All right, I'll give it a shot here. Hopefully I stay connected. So last year really emphasized how low danger is not no danger. This graph is showing the number of incidents per danger rating over the last 4 seasons. And what we classify as an incident here is anything unintentionally triggered and someone was caught, carried, injured, or killed. And this is that same graph just shrunk down a little to show the graph on the bottom here, how many days of each danger rating we had over the last 4 seasons. And on the right there, you see that there is, last year we had an average per forecast region of 40 days of low danger versus the previous 3 seasons, which are a little more typical season. We had 15 to 20 days of low danger. So last year we had almost twice as many days of low danger, which is kind of the basic explanation of why we did see more incidents during low danger, because there was just more of those opportunities. Before I go into the case studies of some of the events that happened last year, I'll just discuss some of the characteristics of avalanches during different danger ratings. And this is showing destructive size of avalanches per danger rating for all of the avalanches over the last 4 seasons here. And the general trend you see is during low, we have generally size 1 to 2. And as you get up to moderate, considerable, and high, the average is size 2. And certainly there's probably more small avalanches during those dangers. They probably don't get recorded as much, but the point being that we don't see really big avalanches during low danger, but they can be harmful. And then the type of trigger for avalanches over the last 4 seasons for each danger rating, this is just a comparison of natural versus human triggered. So all types of human triggered avalanches are grouped on the gray bars here: snowmobile, skier, ice climbers, people walking. And we see kind of there are definitely more human triggered during low and a lot more 50-50 during moderate, and then a lot more natural during considerable and high. And that's what we would expect as forecasters and what we like to see to kind of verify our forecast. It's a little bit curious why we see this many natural avalanches during moderate and low when the danger scale defines those dangers as natural avalanches unlikely. So just to touch on that briefly, this is an natural avalanche that happened during low danger. And these are typically really small, occurring in kind of extreme terrain or an isolated snowpack types. Oftentimes like a cornice break that triggers a little wet loose avalanche or something that gets triggered around rocks due to heating. And so we do see those during low and moderate, and sometimes we get natural avalanches recorded during moderate dangers that actually occurred earlier during a higher danger, but we just don't know the exact timing of natural avalanches a lot. So that could be why that graph shows so many. But what I'm interested in is the human triggered avalanches during low danger. This is what gets people into trouble. And last year we had, as I mentioned, 6 incidents. 1 was a fatality, and there were 4 partial burials, all in 5 separate incidents. And I'll touch on a few of those. I'm not going to go into all of them. I'll also discuss an avalanche that happened during low danger a couple seasons ago, because we had a little bit different type of snowpack then. So I think that's worth mentioning. And then another event back in 2015 that is significant to this discussion. So early or late January last year, which was kind of early winter since we had a slow start. This was an avalanche triggered by a solo skier who was boot packing up a steep north-facing couloir outside of Cook City, and this wind slab broke about 4 inches deep at his feet, and he said it was about 12 inches deep at the deepest part, and didn't catch him. Ran about 200 vertical feet, but once you're pushing into steeper, more extreme terrain, even these small avalanches can have bigger consequences. A few weeks later, coincidentally, the same skier was involved in another avalanche, this time with a partner. They were heading out north of one of our advisory areas, just slightly outside of where we kind of draw our polygon, on a low danger day. And you can see their skin track going up to the right here of the avalanche. And they were heading up to ski a steep couloir that's up out of the left of the photo here. But as they were crossing this pocket under the rock in the center of the photo, the slab broke loose and caught one skier, carried them down to where that red dot is, and they were partially buried with just their hands sticking out. So their head was fully under. The other skier got down to him and uncovered his head in about 2 minutes. And without a partner, that could have been a lot different outcome. So that really speaks to the importance of partners and rescue gear and safe travel, and sticking to those protocols no matter what the danger level is. And in that instance, there was also a factor of this variability in snowfall and weather that was probably touched on a bit in the last talk. We only have one weather station in the center of our forecast zone. And a couple days earlier, it recorded 6 inches of snow. We didn't have much wind, so we bumped up to moderate for a day or two. And then this day was dropped down to low. These skiers headed out a little bit to the outskirts of the area, found more snow than what the weather station had recorded. And so maybe we're finding a little bit more dangerous conditions. And this quote here was just speaking to how they noticed there was more snow, but didn't quite quickly recognize that maybe they should have turned around due to a little bit bigger hazard than they had expected. On February 6th, a snowmobiler was killed in an avalanche near West Yellowstone. And this, in contrast to that last accident, this one occurred on a piece of terrain that is pretty much right off the groomed snowmobile trail. There's actually a groomed trail that goes almost right to the top of this hill. And then there's another trail that comes in across the base of this hill. And so riders go up and down the hill in between the two trails. We call it Ski Hill, and we dig pits there all season long. It's kind of right in the center of our zone. So it's not really that far out, isolated piece of terrain, but it happened on the 21st day of low danger in this area. And this avalanche broke on a layer of surface hoar that had been buried for 18 days. And over that period, we'd only received an inch of snow water equivalent. But prior to this avalanche, we had 2 or 3 inches of snow and some strong, steady west winds that built a thick enough slab on this slope that it was able to catch and carry a snowmobiler into trees. It was a group of 4 riders who were kind of riding all over this slope at the same time. And one was side hilling across the top when it broke, and he was carried down into the trees here. When it happened, his partners didn't see it happen. And so they were looking for him and then saw the avalanche and then started a search. And they, in hindsight, they knew that they were experienced riders. The person who was killed was from out of town, but had previously lived in this area, just 3 miles away from this trailhead. And so they were familiar with this terrain, all had backcountry rescue gear, read the forecast, and they kind of reflected that they felt they let their guard down on their safe travel protocols due to the low danger. This is a photo. He was buried up against the tree, and he was uncovered in 15 to 20 minutes, but there was a lot of trauma involved in this. And it's not a huge slope, but it's definitely avalanche terrain. And when there's trees on the slope, that can really increase the consequences of being caught. A little later in February, this wind slab cycle in the Bridger Range caught us off guard a little bit. This is a photo of a remote triggered hard slab on a small roll. And we had forecasted low danger that day due to just a few inches of recent snow over the last couple of days, and the winds weren't really blowing where our anemometers are located. But further north in this range, we have snow data, but no wind data. And it's kind of typical that this part of the range can get really strong winds, kind of localized. And we had, I think, 3 separate groups report remote triggered hard slabs this day, including this one. The line here shows where a group of 2 were going up this slope, and one skier was skinning up across where this yellow line is when the avalanche broke, caught him and carried him down. And he was not buried, he's uninjured, they were unharmed. This is a photo from where the second skier was standing, and you see the crown where the red arrow is, maybe 6 to 12 inches deep. And that was an instance where essentially the forecast was wrong. They're always wrong, but sometimes they can be useful, as Chris said, but sometimes they're more wrong than other times. And that's why it's important to adjust your plans based on what we're seeing out there during the day. We, make our plan based on the forecast in the morning, but we got to constantly update it when we get surprised by things. And yeah, it was just kind of an isolated wind slab event, and we wish we could have forecasted it better. Kind of not sure what we could have seen better, but sometimes that happens out there. We're looking at a really big area for these forecasts, and I'll discuss that a little bit later. On April 3rd, towards the end of last season, we were kind of getting into more springtime low danger stuff. And a couple skiers came up from a trailhead about 7 miles away from this point. This is Wilson Peak on the center left of the photo. They came up from the other side of this ridge line to ski a line off the peak here, which they did without incident. And then climbing out of the basin, they were skinning up the slope to the right. You can kind of see debris to the right there. And they were skinning up this slope, transitioned to boot packing. And right at the top, the higher skier triggered a wind slab that was maybe 6 inches deep, and the full width of this slope that was 30 or 40 feet. And it caught the lower skier and carried her over these cliffs in the center. She wasn't buried, but had a pretty bad leg injury that they weren't certain what the extent of was. They were worried about fracture. So they hit the SOS on their inReach and were able to get helicopter evacuated before dark. And the situation, it was a really small avalanche, but a terrain trap, and then being more remote than maybe they would have been on a higher danger day, increases the consequences of getting hurt due to a prolonged rescue. And luckily there was good weather and able to get out of there before dark, and they didn't have to spend the night or anything. And the injury wasn't life-threatening, but she did have a broken leg, and the outcome could have been worse. But part of this is also, they had a big objective of skiing off that peak, and then they're also dealing with smaller avalanche terrain on the approach and egress. And we just got to be constantly evaluating and turning on our brains all day long, no matter what the danger level is. It's a little bit closer up of the crown. And then looking at 2 seasons ago, we had a snowpack that's a little more typical of the Rocky Mountains, where we get a buried persistent weak layer that keeps us on edge for triggering big avalanches, and it gets more stubborn, and the likelihood of those avalanches goes down, but the consequences, because they could be so big, the consequences stay high. And we have this pattern a lot in the Rocky Mountains, where we just hold it at moderate for like a week or more without much loading events. And then eventually we kind of got to go to low, but we're still worried about these. And this was one of those instances. We hadn't had snow or heavy wind loading for over a week, and hadn't seen human triggered avalanches in this area for over a week. Felt good about going to low danger. And the first day we went to low danger, a snowmobiler triggered this avalanche. It was 1 to 2 feet deep, broke on a faceted weak layer that had been buried probably for a month. But that day, most popular slopes in the area were just totally tracked up. They'd been hit hard over the last week, and people start pushing into these less tracked pockets and might find that isolated instability. Now in 2015, this was the year before I started forecasting. This is on the north side of Beehive Peak, which is near Big Sky. A group of 4 skiers approached this couloir called the Hanging Garden Couloir. In April, it was low danger. We'd gone through some melt freeze cycles in the spring, and we're dealing with new snow and wind slabs. They came up from the other side of this peak, and then we're descending top down this couloir. The first skier cut out this maybe 20-foot wide wind slab, a foot deep at the most, and was swept over this couple 100-foot cliff and did not survive. This was an accident. Every time we go to low danger, this is, I think about, this is just extreme terrain. There's no room for error. And I know that's what people start to push into. If this is the kind of stuff you want to do, the low danger is the time to do it, but we can't reduce the risk to zero if we're exposed to this kind of stuff. So to summarize, during low danger, there's an increase in exposure to a variety of avalanche slopes, which can mean that smaller avalanches have higher consequences if we're exposed to more terrain traps, and people are pushing in to new terrain further out into the corners of our advisory areas or the edges or just outside of it, and might find isolated instabilities or slightly different weather or snowpack than what we see more in the central parts of our advisory or where we get most of our obs from. Pretty much all these accidents involved experienced or expert skiers and riders. And a couple of things here is like a lot of people, once they've done this for a while, wait for low danger to get into more serious terrain, which is what we expect and what I do, what we encourage people to do. But I also think the experience of these groups led to better outcomes because how prepared they were, because they chose to be there at the safest time possible. They were dealing with small avalanches rather than big avalanches. They had rescue gear that maybe saved lives in a couple situations, communication devices to have quick and efficient rescues. So I think their experience made for better outcomes in these situations, even though they had some close calls. And there were a couple there that didn't end up very well, but I think better than when we see avalanches during high and considerable. And with skiers, a lot of these happened while they were going up the slope, which is a common thing in accidents that we see and just something we have to keep in mind, in that whether we're going up or down, we could trigger something. I don't think any of these accidents had multiple people caught, which maybe speaks to their experience of being able to travel and only expose one person at a time. So to elaborate on how low danger does not equal no danger, we need to remember that forecasts are more than a color or a danger rating. And it's really important, especially if you're going into avalanche terrain. If you want to ski or ride on steep slopes, you need to understand the current weather, snowpack, and avalanche problems. Keep in mind that our forecasts are regional scale, but riders and skiers are often thinking of the slope scale. So we're giving you a baseline in the morning, but we don't know every slope stability. If you want to ski and ride on steep slopes, it's up to you to make that assessment. And we target a wide range of users. It's not just backcountry skiers and snowmobilers. It's the general public, people who might be hiking on groomed trails or snowmobiling on groomed trails and not know that they're crossing runout zones or something. So when we're saying low danger, it's not saying you can just turn your brain off and center punch anything. It's saying that kind of if you're avoiding avalanche terrain, if you have no intention, you're going to be totally fine during low danger. But during high danger, if you don't know what avalanche terrain is, you should probably stay home, and you really need to be able to identify it and avoid it because there's little room for error. And that's when we see mistakes of people, they know it's high, but they think they're avoiding an avalanche terrain, but they just get off the trail a little and get caught. And those are super tragic, just like any accident. But it's just an example of how broad our forecasts are. And when we want to play and ski an avalanche terrain, there's more than just looking at the color. And then we got to constantly reinforce our safe travel habits of the basics, carrying rescue gear, exposing just one person at a time, no matter what the danger level is. And so what this is kind of brought up to me is there's this kind of risk homeostasis that as the danger decreases, we increase our exposure to avalanche terrain. And therefore we're really kind of having the same risk, if not greater, as that danger goes down. If we stay at avalanche terrain during high danger, it's pretty low risk. But if we get into it during low danger, it's still risky. So keep that in mind. As avalanche danger decreases, the risk can stay the same if you're going into avalanche terrain. And then finally, the basics of decision making. When I talk about decision making to awareness lectures, people who are just getting into this, is we emphasize that most avalanche accidents occur due to either underestimating the avalanche hazard or due to overestimating our ability to manage the terrain. And that example I just said of, we know it's high danger, but if we can't manage the terrain well, we don't have a good big margin for error. And so in order to navigate avalanche terrain safely, we have to make an objective assessment of the hazard and adjust our travel plan and terrain accordingly. And I think in a lot of these instances, most people were, and by being prepared, they had a little bit better outcomes. But we can't, if we're getting into avalanche terrain or being in the mountains a lot, the risk is never totally zero. So I'll end it with that, and I will take any questions here. Thanks for hanging with me there.
Thanks, Alex. Super great discussion. I know for me personally, going to low is sometimes the trickiest thing to message, especially when you're dealing with that uncertainty around, the difference between unlikely and possible, right, in the language, or isolated versus specific. So thanks for compiling all that. I am curious from your perspective, or you guys up there in the Gallatin, after looking at this, especially given last year's kind of high number of incidents at low danger, has that changed how you guys are approaching your messaging or your decision making going to low?
That's a really good question. I think I've had that asked after each time I've presented this. And I don't know that our decision making of when we go to low is changing much. I think in most of those accidents, pretty much, yeah, most of the time we feel like we didn't miss anything that based on what the information we had, when the weather is, there's these like localized weather events and stuff, there's not much we could have done ahead of time to see that coming. And that's just part of the uncertainty. But I think our messaging may change a little bit in just when we're low, really thinking about those user groups that are getting into avalanche terrain versus high. We're more worried about those user groups that are trying to avoid it and might make a mistake. I think during high and considerable, these more experienced users are taking a good step back and not usually getting surprised. I mean, some people try to outsmart the snowpack, and that's a different story. But yeah, during low, I think we'll try to focus a little more on it's unlikely, not impossible, but and not being that broken record's always the challenge, right? Low danger doesn't equal no danger. Unlikely is not impossible, but yeah, just coming up with new ways to help people avoid these little accidents. But yeah, it's kind of hard because that's when people want to get out, and that's, as forecasters, when we want to feel good about them getting out there.
Totally. We do have a question in the chat that kind of piggybacks on this. Ryan's wondering if you could speak to the forecast language you use. for situations that you would maybe describe as scary moderate, or in this case, more of a scary low danger. And have you received any feedback that indicates as whether that information is understood by the reading public? Yeah. I guess specifically around the times when you're changing danger ratings. I know sometimes it's you're on that knife's edge before you make the commitment to drop.
Yeah. I think when we have those scary moderates and lows, we do a little bit of a tweak to the danger scale. Sometimes we bring the travel advice down from the next level up. Like our likelihoods may be low, but we're still saying really assess the snowpack or consider avoiding avalanche terrain. Yeah, I think those can be really tricky times.
No, 100%. It's challenging for sure to.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the public's reception of it, a few years ago we had a lot of spicy moderate, and we put out some extra, like a video chat of just like, what does this mean? And because there's different types of moderate, and like the spicy moderate's a little more widespread, whereas like our non-spicy moderate maybe actually like specific pieces of terrain that are a little more identifiable, new snow, wind slab stuff. And I guess that's really the parts of this talk is like, if you're at moderate and low are the times that we expect people to maybe be going in avalanche terrain, and you can't just look at the color, you want to know what that avalanche problem is. And when, persistent weak layers, just the more experience you get, the more you feel like you're rolling the dice, unless you know exactly what terrain it's not on.
Awesome. Do we have any more questions here in the room? All right. Looks like you're getting off easy here too. Well, thanks so much, Alex. We really appreciate you joining us today. Hope you guys are having a good storm system this weekend.
Yeah, we just came off a good bit of snow, and hopefully there's a little more on the way.
All right.
So, haven't seen much low danger yet.
Yeah.
It's a little different.
Totally. Awesome. Well, have a great winter, and thanks again for joining us.